To order the City of Portage Planning Commission for October 3rd, 2022. If you would stand and say the pledge. Mr. Monroe, could
Tom Cherry,
Here.
Gina Geisfers, Sam LeBoy, Charles Meyer. Here. Hortensio Moreno. Charles Thompson,
Here.
Melissa Weidenbach,
Here.
Kevin Witherspoon, Denise Lillard.
here. Has everybody had an opportunity to look at their minutes from the September meeting? And if there are no additions or corrections, may I have a motion?
Motion to approve.
We have a motion to approve. Do we have a second?
I second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Any updates from committees or staff?
I do not have a report at this time.
Could you call our first order of business?
Z0422, Lily Ann Fernwood, LLC, care of Todd Leith of Hepner, Wagner, and Evans, 103 East Lincoln Way, Valparaiso, Indiana, requesting a change of zoning from R2, low-density residential, to C2, medium to large-scale commercial, for the 6.87 acres plus or minus just east of Willow Creek and US Highway 6.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you. My name is Todd Leith. I'm here on behalf of the petitioner in this matter, Lillian Fernwood LLC. It's a company, of course, and Frank and Virginia are here with me to help answer any questions that you have. They're the principals and the owners of the company, which is the petitioner in the matter. As was indicated when we called the case this evening, we're asking for a rezoning or a zone map amendment, as the law calls it, for a small portion of a larger parcel. And the parcel that we're asking to be rezoned is just under 7 acres, 6.87 acres. It's on Highway 6. It's on the north side. And on the slide I've got for you, you can see its orientation. The most near intersection of Highway 6 is to the left or west, and that is Swanson Road. So the angled line, if I can point with my cursor, and it's not letting me do that, so let's see if we can't find my laser. There we go. So this line here, the west boundary, is actually Willow Creek, the flow of the ditch. And that serves as the western boundary of the property in question. Because we are not part of an overall parcel, this is a parcel that we're creating, if you will, for rezoning. We had it surveyed, so the legal description is subject to a survey. That's part of our petition, and we have that legal description for the 6.8 acres in this location. So we want to rezone this parcel. It has 350 feet approximately of frontage on Highway 6. Our intended use is for retail and service development. We don't have any particular users, but we want to change the zoning so that we can purchase the property. Lily and Fernwood are not the owners. Shriner Hospital is actually the owner of the property, but we have a contingent contract to purchase from them. The zone change is one of the things that we need to have before we do that. And in order to do a retail and service type development, with a consistent but broad range of uses under your zoning ordinance, we've selected the C2 medium and large-scale commercial district as our request. This is the same principle. Frank and Virginia are the same owners of the property immediately to the east, which was rezoned just in June in this same area and consistent with and contiguous with the parcel that we're asking you to rezone. And that was approved by the City Council after your hearing, which was June of this year. And again, it was that same C2 zoning classification. And that's the parcel just to the east that we rezoned earlier. So as I indicated, this is a zone map amendment, a rezoning, and state law says that if we ask for a rezoning or a change of zoning, that you, the City Council, and as the Advisory Plan Commission, should pay reasonable regard to 5 things. Your comprehensive plan, and we're going to talk a little bit about that because I think that's the most important of these. But number 2 is the current conditions and character of current structures and uses in each district. And I would suggest to you that all up and down Highway 6, certainly between Willow Creek and Swanson, in this particular part of the city, it's all commercial and not residential. It's not the R2 classification of the zoning that it carries today. Number 3, the most desirable use for which the land in each district is adapted. And again, based upon what we see there today, what we anticipate future developments to be in this particular area, both on the north and south side, I don't believe that the R2 residential is appropriate. It's not the most desirable use in that part of the city. Number 4 is the conservation of property values throughout the jurisdiction. I would argue and suggest to you that if this were to remain R2, it would have a negative effect on the property values of this property, but also on the neighboring properties that are commercial or will be developed as commercial, because those homes that would be developed on this property would be adversely affected and would complain about businesses on neighboring properties, and therefore it would not be the right thing to do or the thing that would conserve property values. And then lastly, responsible development and growth. I think that it is the responsible thing to do is to create a situation where there are not competing uses. And right now, that's what we have with this outlier, this R2 zoning in what is in my opinion, a commercial district. So that number 1 item I told you we would come back to is your comprehensive plan. And your comprehensive plan has within it a future land use map. And in that future land use map, this property is anticipated or is planned for future development to be general commercial, exactly the C2 zoning classification that we're asking you to change the classification for on your official zoning map to be consistent with the comprehensive plan. I indicated to you that the 7 acres, the 6.87 acre parcel is not the entire parcel that is the subject of our future ownership. If we are successful, that parcel that's outlined in blue will be purchased. That's the property that we have under contract. The green box is what we're asking you to rezone. And you can see that it's consistent, the northern line of that property is consistent and matches the parcel that you just rezoned in June to the east. So we've brought that line further over, and then we've drawn another line matching on Willow Creek because we think Willow Creek is a natural buffer. I believe that more of the box, if you will, more of the land outside of the green box is probably appropriate to continue the C2 zoning classification, but that's not what we're asking for. If we get north of this line, That may or may not be something appropriate for a rezoning, and as to what that would be rezoned, that's a discussion for another day. But I wanted to show to you that we are buying far more than the 7 acres, but we're only asking for the 7 acres in that green box to be rezoned with this petition. And that's consistent with the land just rezoned to the east, and of course, consistent with your comprehensive plan. So the Department of Transportation, which controls the highway in front, has an average daily count of 18,000 cars per day. That's a commercial district by anybody's standards, I think. It's not a residential type of street or one that would be conducive, in my opinion, to residential development. So again, a large traffic volume. It's also, we looked at the wetlands map. This is not a formal wetlands determination, but it's the best case evidence without sending out a on-site survey to look at wetlands, but the property in question does not have any wetlands according to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife wetland map. So we've looked at that as well. That's all that I have for you for our initial presentation, but again, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now open the public hearing. Is there anybody here to speak for the petitioner? Is there anybody here to speak for the petitioner? Is there anybody here to speak for the petitioner? Is there anybody here to speak against the petitioner?
No?
Do I have to hold this down? Oh, my gosh. I know. Reverend Michael Cooper, 5455 Clem Road, here in Portage. I'm before the Planning Commission this evening to speak against the proposed complete rezoning of this parcel along our city's defining natural waterway, rezoning the entire parcel to large-scale commercial. For those who are recent additions to this commission, I would speak briefly about the 3 other corners of this section of US 6 along the creek at this point where it begins its run through many of the residential neighborhoods and to the national park between US 6 and Lake Michigan. Each of those corners have been before this board in the past few years for various medium and large-scale commercial considerations. Each an encroachment on wetlands and designated stream buffer zones that are outlined in our city code. The most egregious to date of those being directly across the street, where what was presented to this body stated minimal disturbance to the outer stream buffer zone, but at the initial site clearing, that proved to be a lie to this commission, as the entire buffer zone and wetlands up to the bank of Willow Creek were strip cleared. Proof that the current process does not secure the protections outlined in our municipal code. I'm therefore asking this Plan Commission to take a different path, consistent with both our stream protections ordinance and our zoning ordinance. I'm requesting that the Planning Commission consider, when they consider the motion tonight, to recommend a zoning change to our Common Council, that motion to include the additional zoning change that the area defined by our stream protection ordinance, that would be from the bank of Willow Creek to the end of the outer buffer zone, that you recommend to the City Council that be rezoned as CO or conservation. That is a zoning in our defined in our zoning ordinance. First, this recommendation from the Planning Commission to the Common Council would make it clear to the developer that the City of Portage takes seriously the importance of these stream buffer zones. Given the allowed uses under this requested zoning classification of medium to large scale, that could mean various service-related waste products, including phosphates, ammonias, and petroleum products. And having the full stream buffer zone intact to filter out those waste is key to keeping Willow Creek clean and safe for our residents in Portage. Now, before our attorney and community development director chime in with their opinions regarding the conservation zone specification, I would express my defense of what they may read to you, specifically regarding the word voluntary that is unique to this zoning classification. Luckily, it does not appear to me that Attorney Leach is here by force or duress. Rather, the developer has voluntarily chosen to request that the city rezone this property, a process this evening that was initiated by the petitioner and not by the city. My reading of the requirement is that it is there to stop the city from initiating a zoning change to take a parcel from a developable classification to an undevelopable classification, neither of which I am asking this commission to recommend tonight. Designating the buffer zone as conservation by our Common Council does not change the amount of developable property 1 inch. As development of the stream buffer zone is already restricted in our code. Let me repeat, designating the buffer zone as conservation does not add or subtract from the area that they can develop right now. Until they request a variance from the Stormwater Board, they cannot place any building, curb, or asphalt in the buffer zone. What changes the amount of developable property is the city Stormwater Board, who grants variances to use land along Willow Creek, and that process is completely outside the review and consideration of this commission. I'm asking this commission to simply make those development restrictions currently in place for this property completely solid, where they cannot be varianced away by the Stormwater Board. I'm requesting the commission simply to add to or to amend any motion tonight to recommend to the Common Council that the stream protection buffer zone as outlined in our city municipal code to be zoned as conservation, CO. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody here to speak against the petitioner? Is there anybody here to speak against the petitioner? If not, I close the public hearing and open for questions by the board. Attorney Leith, would you like to answer? I apologize.
Sure, no, that's fine. I guess I'm a little bit surprised by the comments from the public. So the Willow Creek stream, which I indicated forms our western boundary of the property that we're seeking to rezone, is there, and the gentleman is correct. The city has a stream protection ordinance. It's not in the zoning ordinance, and it is administered by the Stormwater Board, and there is a process within which you can receive a variance from the requirements of the protections. The ordinance has 3 separate corridors or zones to protect the flow and the water quality in the stream. And clearly the inner of those zones is the most critical. That's where the water is. That's where the bank sides are. But as you go out further, the purpose of those are different. And all taken together, it's to protect the flow of the water from a drainage standpoint, but also the quality of the water and the abatement of any pollutants that could arrive or go into the stream, such as soil erosion, sedimentation. The outside zone of that corridor, I think, one of the purposes is to provide for access so that the stream itself can be accessed to be maintained, removing any downed trees or removing brush so that the water flows. Certain developments, and this is on the south side, and the gentleman kind of alluded to that, received a variance because they were providing better access to the stream corridor in that outer zone, in that outer strip, than the nature was providing. So that developer happened to receive a variance. Now, he got himself in trouble because his contractor got out ahead with some clearing of trees. And the full force and weight of the city legal department came down on that gentleman, that developer. One might argue that that's the fact that they had to do that is a bad thing, that the environment was harmed. I guess my argument tells me that the city is enforcing that ordinance very strenuously. And there was abatements and so forth with regard to what happened on the south side. Gentleman used the word lie. Whether that's true or not is irrelevant. What is important is we weren't there. We're on the north side. And we haven't even come close to engineering a site for this. This is the first step in that. And whether or not we're going to ask for a variance, I doubt that we will, but I don't know how the engineering will come out. I don't know where we're going to have any issues. I can tell you that Highway 6 in this particular area is limited access, as you can appreciate. The 16 acres to the east has only 3 access points in their 850 feet of frontage. So that will probably play a very important part as to how this 350 feet of frontage, the 850 feet of frontage on the 16 acres is all engineered together, if that's how that ultimately bans out. I can tell you, I've represented parties who have gone to the Stormwater Board and asked for exactly the variances that we were discussing. They don't give those out willy-nilly. You have to have a good reason why, and you have to have an alternative to provide for the protections that the ordinance otherwise ensures. The idea of rezoning this parcel to something other than what we've asked for, that's not in the public notice. I would suggest that you may or may not have jurisdiction. You have counsel here who can suggest to that. But I can tell you that the voluntary part of what was suggested has not been met. The ordinance intent under your zoning ordinance says that the property owner must voluntarily petition for that zoning classification. We didn't voluntarily petition for conservation. We voluntarily petitioned for C2. So I don't think that you have the intent or the jurisdiction to change the zoning to anything other than what we've requested. Happy to answer any questions.
Attorney McClure, could you go ahead and give us your opinion on this? On what? On the wetlands area, the difference between CO and they have voluntarily.
Our city code requires that the conservation easement be requested in a voluntary petition. I think it's pretty, I don't know, intellectually dishonest to think that here on for a rezone that he's requesting, that as part of that rezone, there would be an additional part of the property rezoned to something else. I don't think qualifies as voluntary or close to a voluntary type of situation. Also, we would have a direct taking issue because if we add a subsequent zoning district next to what's being requested, then you invoke other parts of the code that the Plan Commission obviously needs to be aware of, and the fact that when you have a lower zoned piece of property next to a higher use piece of property, it automatically adds additional side yard setbacks above and beyond what's already there on the ditch itself. Ultimately, what I think the complaint is that another arm of this city government in their jurisdiction followed the due process of the petitioner and through a public process awarded a zoning variance on the stormwater. And I don't know that this board's in a position, or I'm in a position to say that was a good decision or a bad decision, but ultimately it was a decision because it was their decision and it was made in the proper forum. So at this point in time, I couldn't in good conscience tell this board that they would be in their position or in the authority to recommend the conservation easement along the ditch on top of what already exists in city code for the protections of that. Merely disagreeing with the board doesn't turn into putting conservation zoning over a ditch at this point in time.
Then a question, I mean, if it happened before, and I totally understand it's not a voluntary request, so I don't think we could go down that path. But how do we protect Willow Creek in the future so that if it does go to the other board?
Just like any other citizen in the city of Portage, you go to that board and you remonstrate and tell the reasons why you wouldn't think their variance should be granted. I mean, ultimately, that board has the engineers and the staff and the personnel, and they're the board that has been granted the authority to make those decisions. Just like that board can't stop this board from approving Plan Commission, subdivisions or control the recommendation on their rezoning. We're not in a position to overlap and take authority away from the Stormwater Board.
Any questions? If not, go ahead.
No questions.
Okay. If not, could you explain the details of the buffer along Willow Creek? What does that entail?
Speaking from memory, because I don't have the ordinance in front of me, as I indicated, there's a inner buffer zone, there's a center buffer zone, and I'm going to let Mr. Monroe. So let's let Mr. Monroe, because he's got it.
As I remember to hit the button. So stream protection is covered under City of Portage Municipal Code, Chapter 42, Section 42-161. That is the definition section. Section 42-162 outlines buffer yard requirements, which I think is the question. This is what the how the section reads. The buffer requirements: A buffer is required on all legal drains and natural drainage ways identified as impacted drainage areas in section 42-43. B, the legal drains and natural drainage ways shall be protected by a buffer area consisting of 3 parts: an inner core buffer zone, a middle zone, and an outer buffer zone. The width of the buffer zones shall be determined as follows. 1, the inner core buffer zone. The inner core buffer zone shall extend 25 feet from each bank of a natural drainage way and 50 feet from each bank of a legal drain. 2, the middle zone. The middle zone shall extend an additional 25 feet from either side of the inner core zone, the outward limit of the defined 100-year floodplain limit, or the outward limit of the jurisdictional wetland habitat, whichever is greater. And 3, outer buffer zone. The outer buffer zone shall consist of an additional 20 feet setback for structures. Limits of use and restrictions. 1, inner core buffer zone. The inner core buffer zone is to remain undisturbed during and after construction. Allowable uses in the inner core buffer zone are very restricted and include flood control structures, utilities, rights-of-way, and footpaths. No clearing, grading, or stockpiling of material may occur during or after construction. 2, middle zone. The middle zone can be maintained by mowing or other maintenance. Tree removal is allowed by permit. Allowable uses in the inner core buffer zone are restricted to passive recreational uses and bike paths. Some stormwater BMPs can be constructed in the middle zone if outside the area of any floodplain or wetland. 3, outer buffer zone. The outer buffer zone may consist of forest or maintained turf. Use of the outer buffer zone is unrestricted and can include in residential uses such as lawn, garden, compost, and waste, and yard waste. Storm water BMPs can be constructed in the outer buffer zone. And the article goes on to talk about what can and can't happen within those buffer zones in terms of additional clearing, erosion control, so on and so forth. I can continue reading if you would like.
No, I think that's sufficient. Any other questions? If no questions, may I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to send a favorable recommendation, changing of R2 to C2 to the Common Council.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Monroe, could you call roll?
Tom Cherry,
Yes.
Charles Meyer.
Here. Yes.
Hortensia Moreno. Yes. Charles Thompson.
Yes.
Melissa Weidenbach.
Yes.
Denise Little.
Yes. Congratulations.
Very good. Thank you so much.
Could I just say one thing? Thank you, but we're going to be good stewards of that property. We are not going to do anything to disturb that creek. I can assure you of that.
Thank you. May I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
I second.